Welcome everyone to the weekly crypto recap. Really delighted to have you guys here. It is very sunny here in Australia at the moment, and it is Australia Day today. So it's been referred to recently by a lot of people as Invasion Day. I used to refer to it as the hottest 100 day, but they don't do that countdown anymore. So now let's just call it a really hot day in Australia. But we have two gentlemen who are not from Australia who are joining us today. Delighted to welcome back Azafoid, aka Chris Karabats from Smart Cash. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Happy to be here as usual. Thanks for having me.
And we have Dustin, and I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name. I tried earlier. It's just,
okay.
If I have to practice like Guido later when we talk about Venezuela, then your last name is going to be a bit difficult. But you have an awesome podcast. You've actually featured Bitbacker on your podcast, a great segment there. But welcome to the show for the first time. Great to have you on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So I'll post your podcast in the link below afterwards so that people can check out your show. And same with yours, Sapoid, as well. So you've been doing an awesome show with Smart Cash. So I'll have both of those there so you can get more of these wonderful gentlemen because they're incredibly smart and will have a lot of wisdom to share with you.
It's debatable.
High stakes. Oh my
God.
God.
No, I feel
Just don't let me down, guys. All right. I've already set up expectations. So I was just complaining that it's so bright here. I'm having a lot of trouble seeing my screen. This is the type of problem you have in Australia. And next week I'm pretty excited because I'm emceeing the Satoshi Roundtable again this year. So the next weekly recap will be live streamed from the roundtable. So that's going to be fun. I've had Sarah Blinko on my show heaps before, so I'll be chatting with her and a bunch of others. So I'll let you all know about that later. But to start off with, let's start with Venezuela because this is huge news that happened this week. There's some crazy stuff going on in Venezuela. Welcome everyone who's joined the chat. By the way, so Venezuela, a few days ago, President Trump declared or recognized the opposition leader as the interim president of Venezuela. Just decided, hey, we're recognizing this other person as the interim president. There are a lot of things we can talk about with regard to that. But then Canada followed suit, Colombia, Brazil, a bunch of other countries all then jumped on the bandwagon and said, yes, we do too. I mean, Venezuela, especially in recent years, has a long track history, has a long track record of not necessarily having the cleanest and most transparent elections, but then and again have another country come in and say like, well, we're deciding for you is another thing. But let's relate that to crypto. So we have been talking a lot on the show about the Petro. We've talked a lot about the hyperinflation of the Bolivar, how their solution to the hyperinflation was just knock off some zeros from the end, as if that could, influence their monetary policy and make things better. And now we have this interim president, apparently, who is a big Bitcoin fan, very anti the Petro, calls the Petro a total scam, says that Maduro is scamming his own people. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the Petro and what's going on there.
Well,
lot to cover.
The Petro has been, they certainly copied all the best ICO practices that we learned about in 2018 when launching the Petro.
By best, you mean best ICO practices?
Yes. They ended up, I mean, at a technical level, they apparently ended up cloning Dash basically for this coin. Where the mining is, I have no idea. I've never been able to find any info on that and everything, but they started a few weeks or months ago now, actually paying out their retirees, their pensioners with the Petro, which at the state of things was a pretty cruel way to go about it because those are the people with the least amount of recourse should something go wrong with it. It was supposed to be stable and they've bumped it up at least twice since launching it in value. Yeah, again, stable. And the latest numbers I read, if indeed it is supposed to be pegged to a barrel of oil, because it's supposed to be backed by barrels of oil, theoretically, because they do have the largest standard reserves of oil in the world underneath Venezuela, which just adds a whole other area to how sad it is down there. Yeah. But that would put the price of a barrel of oil at about $11 based on the current exchange rates. in Venezuela. But again, it's all, I mean, if you can actually, who knows? They're ordering banks to accept it. They're ordering people to use it. But at the same time, from what I hear from people down there, nobody really knows how to use it. I mean, like they log into a site, they see that they have it, and that's all.
And it's just another shitty government fiat, right? Like fiat meaning it has value by decree. It doesn't have value because people have found it to have value. It has value because the government declares it has value. And the government of Venezuela has declared that the Petro has value, and there's no way to actually gauge this. It's not available on any exchanges. It's not available on any exchanges even in Venezuela. You can't freely trade this. So there's absolutely no way to have price determination with the Petro. So it's like this very opaque, shitty government fiat, but just in electronic form, in digital form.
Yeah, they actually, I remember Reuters had a story last August where they actually went to Venezuela to kind of investigate this. And as of then, I haven't seen anything in follow-up to it. But, part of this was there's going to be a superintendent of cryptocurrencies, and they went to the Ministry of Finance. That office doesn't even exist. The website for it was kind of gone.
Wow.
They actually went out to the oil fields. They're supposedly backing it. It's vacant. There's just no activity. There's no equipment there.
Is that just like a giant sign saying Petro lives here or something?
It's just basically GPS coordinates saying we're saying there's oil here, but there's nothing there. There very well could be oil, but it's definitely not backed by any oil above ground.
Wow. And that's the whole thing. Like when you have currencies that are backed by things like this new rage of, oh, well, I like blockchain, but I'd like it better if it was backed by a commodity that actually has value. You get into this like weird world of like what? Like, I mean, it drives me a little nutty when people say things like that, because also then you introduce like the counterparty risk. And when you have a government that's saying, oh, well, this is valuable because it's backed by this. But like, does that mean that you can trade it in for oil? Like, can people actually be trading their Petro in and get like actual valuable oil after that? Because I don't see that happening at all.
That was what they said, but
are they?
There's no mechanism to do it.
Is the website again like they give a website and it just doesn't exist? They're like, yeah, just trade it in for oil here at this web. You're like 404. Sorry, like
and not like a barrel of oil is going to do you any good. Of course, at the same time there, I have people with family in Venezuela telling me that some of their crypto competent people in Venezuela are literally burning oil locally to run their generators to mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That's interesting. And also, I mean, the government really, so like I've been following crypto in Venezuela for years. I like talked about it on Stossel, like I think it was 2013 or 14. And that was when crypto was first getting like really interesting. We were thinking, okay, what are some world use cases for this? And we see in Venezuela lots of mining operations. They have capped electricity, like fixed cost of electricity, which means that you basically have a free minting or printing press or money mint in your basement if you are mining Bitcoin there. So it's it was just really great way for people to make money there. It was actually saving lives. People were using this to support whole communities. They're using it to buy goods from Walmart and from Overstock, having it illegally shipped into the country because there's just not food available there. It's just, it's awful. So like, this is something that's like been in the Venezuelan mindset for a while. And what I find fascinating about the Petro is that it's so shit, but at the same time, it really does show you how much mind space cryptocurrency takes up in Venezuela. The fact that the people have a national currency that is a cryptocurrency, they've got them thinking about this, even if, as you said, Dustin, like they don't know how to use it yet. So there clearly needs to be a lot more education there, but it's still an interesting area where if they're already thinking in terms of, oh, okay, digital money can be this viable form of money, blockchain money can be a viable form of money, it already gets them like so far ahead of a lot of other people in the world who just see this as magical internet money that doesn't work at all.
Well, I think for a lot of people there, the US dollar is still king, and the Bitcoins that they can mine are something they can exchange for US dollars in the black market locally through local Bitcoins or whatever. I think that really is the driving factor behind it in the area for most people.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say, Dustin?
Oh, I was gonna say when you first were talking about the story with Guido, and I'm trying to figure out, because the hype around him with saying that he's pro Bitcoin. The only thing I found was just he tweeted about it one time. Was there something else that I missed?
But he was tweeting about that in 2014 when no one was tweeting about this. So the fact that he was excited because of the first Venezuelan exchange was opening, and that's in 2014, I think that should be indicative of where his mindset is. And also he's spoken out like a lot about the Petro as well, about how scamming people. So it is this interesting situation where you can see that he's clearly savvy. He understands the difference between one crypto and the next, which a lot of people just don't get the difference. He sees the Bitcoin is a lot more valuable than the Petro. So already I feel like this is interesting. This is promising. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in Venezuela. I don't think any of us do. So it will be interesting to see this play out. I mean, you also see Venezuela as being this very robust economy as well. Like, not right now, obviously, clearly it's terrible at the moment, but the infrastructure there, like as you mentioned, Zafoy, they used to be one of the richest countries in Latin America, and it's just completely collapsed, but they still have like the underpinnings. They have all these oil reserves. They have things that could make it work if they didn't have such shitty leaders making terrible policy decisions. So I wonder if someone like Guido, which is definitely how you pronounce it, if he comes into play, like, is it completely out of the question to think maybe we could see an economy rebuilt around something like Bitcoin? I mean, is that completely outlandish to be entertaining that thought?
No, I don't think so. I still have reservations, because it's always in this part of the world, when there's it's not necessarily a coup in a way, but it kind of almost in a way where the parliament's kind of declaring that the president's no longer valid, even though technically they are right. It's always really iffy how these things turn out, because usually there's a lot of popular support and people going, oh great, the bad guy's gone, but sometimes that can lead to even worse things. But he does have kind of a promising background. I mean, he comes from their middle class. He studied in the U.S. He was protesting the closing of independent news stations like 10 years ago or so. But he's kind of in more of like, it seems like more of like kind of the Chinese model of where they want to keep the state control of certain aspects, but they want to harness the market for the betterment of society. And there's really no better example than what they're living right now, that state ownership of the means of production is not a good thing at all. So, but I mean, yeah, I do think that's a really good thing. And also I'm really interested to see in 20, 30 years how, there's probably going to be people who were lower middle class in Venezuela and Argentina and other countries around the world that we would consider third world right now, that'll probably be more wealthy than a lot of people who grew up in America right now, just because of the fact that they were probably exposed to Bitcoin at a very early, an earlier stage than when a lot of other people in the West are probably actually going to start jumping on board, in the decades in the future. So I'm kind of hopeful for what it can do for the region.
Yeah, for sure. We have a power chat that's come through from Polly. This is for you, Zafoid. When Zafoid becomes El Presidente of Venezuela, will he be able to visit, and will he demand we change our underwear every 30 minutes? I mean, it's a great question. What's your answer there, Zafoid?
Only Polly will have to change every 30 minutes.
Only Polly. I think that's a great response. Absolutely. Thank you, Polly, for using the Bitbacker Power Chat. I'm going to add the link to the chat, so if anyone wants to send in any questions, it's awesome if you do it through there. I also use Super Chat, but Google takes 30% of Super Chats, and Bitbacker does not. So I love the Super Chats there. And also just want to mention, so since my last stream, Max Glass sent me a Super Chat saying thank you for introducing me to Bitbacker, and Litecoin Furby sent me a Super Chat about a Litecoin lotto that they're doing. So that's another interesting thing that I would love to look into, because I mean, we know that the government likes to have their monopolies on things, and the lottery is one of those things. I know it certainly is in Australia. So, cryptocurrency giving you the ability to run lotteries is a very interesting idea that perhaps we'll talk about on a later episode there. So just going back there, Zavoid, you sent me a couple of tweets from WikiLeaks about what's going on there in terms of like the other countries just deciding who the leader of Venezuela is. So do you want to run us by what you said through?
Well, there were a couple things. WikiLeaks is taking an interesting stance on this, and it could be considered principled, or it could be considered further evidence that they're just backing whatever Russia backs. Basically, right now, you have the U.S.-aligned nations, including Brazil, now that Bolsonaro is president of Brazil, backing the opposition in Venezuela, where the people in Cuba, Mexico, Russia, China are all, of course, staying with Maduro. And we know that China has been very busy in Venezuela lately. The social credit and the camera monitoring system that they have has been being put in place in Venezuela. And it really is kind of a grab for China, because China needs Venezuela's oil. China doesn't have much natural reserves for oil. And if Venezuela and Iran go away, China has a real big problem with not having to buy oil from, well, us. And they don't want that. They want to be free from our influence. So this is sort of a rebuilding of the old BRICS, which was Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But since Brazil has switched to the dark side of U.S. allegiance, then they're hoping that Venezuela can fill that slot in South America for them, I imagine. But WikiLeaks is basically saying, no, I mean, all these other countries saying, backing the coup doesn't change what the facts on the ground. And then they sent another tweet saying, well, what if, China and Russia and India said, all right, Pelosi's president of America. That's who we're going to talk to. I mean, is that something anybody would respect or want? And
it's an interesting situation.
Not.
Like, I mean, this kind of regime pressure can come from all kinds of places. You'd expect that it needs to come from the people within the country that the leader is actually leading for it to come into effect. But I don't know. I mean, there does seem to be a lot of dissent for Maduro right now. Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting. It does seem that this could be the verge of a coup. So maybe the president, maybe Trump and Canada and Brazil, Colombia, all these other places, maybe them coming on board and saying, hey, we support this, is more just like momentum for the people who are already in the streets. I mean, I completely agree with you. It seems totally illegitimate, and how could they possibly just decide, like, it seems crazy. But maybe it is just them saying, hey, you guys who are out there protesting, we're on your side and we back you, which again is like,
yep, sure, that's good. But at the same time, how many regime changes did America back in South America that did not turn out so well for anybody
How many
involved?
regime changes has America backed in the entire world that have not turned out so good? They are doing a bang-up job of predicting the winners and predicting the good guys. America, please stop choosing winners and losers. Yeah. You're not very good at it.
It's not a great situation any way you look at it.
That, and I don't think any of the Canada's not one, and Trudeau's not been one that's been very had a great record so far as well of who he supports and who he doesn't.
Trudeau is he's very pretty.
Yeah, but I think like right now, the situation is so bad in Venezuela that nobody wants to be on the record, queued up 5 years from now going, we need to give Maduro, a little bit more chance to turn things around. Like, I think everyone's just kind of washing their hands of it, and the writing's on the wall, so to speak.
Let's just give Maduro a little bit more time to starve the people in his country.
Yeah.
And maybe another 4 million people will flee in the interim, because who wants to live in a country that, is just so out of control as it is right now? Like, my heart goes out to these people, and you just see the fact that these people are voting with their feet. It's becoming less and less easy for them to flee, less and less easy for them to cross the borders. But like millions of people have left. It's incredible. So I
10% of their population. 10% of their population is left.
God.
And I mean, the average Venezuelan lost something like 20 pounds in 2017.
Oh my God.
Average. That is just abhorrent.
It's disgusting. So I hope that, I mean, as you said, writing's on the wall. We've got to see what happens next. It seems like they are on the verge of a collapse / coup / I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but it does seem like people have had enough and something's got to give, and they've got a lot of momentum behind them at the moment. So we'll be keeping you updated on all the things that are going on there. As news comes out, maybe we'll do some impromptu live streams just to let you guys all know what's going on, because it is, I mean, I think it's such an important thing that's happening in the world right now. And I'm very interested in the crypto side of it, because Venezuela they really did just come out and they said, hey, we have a national cryptocurrency. We have the Petro. Like, this is something that really centers it in the crypto space. And it's, you know, it just goes to show you that not all cryptos are made alike. Not all blockchains are made alike. They are not all equal. And maybe this is a good learning experience for people who don't know that much, to say, no, this is clearly a very different thing to Bitcoin, for example.
I forget the quote. What was it? Thomas Edison. I might be butchering the number, but he said, you know, I didn't fail. I learned 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb.
Exactly.
And I think that the Petro is one of those 1,000 ways that we're learning not to do a crypto. So along with quite a few other ones in 2010.
Yeah.
It's further proof that just putting something on a blockchain doesn't magically make it good.
What? It doesn't? Well, what have I been covering all of this time? Smells on the blockchain. I think I'll be seeing Jimmy Song at the round table, so maybe we'll do like another ICO. I don't know if you've seen that video, but Jimmy Song did this ICO pitch where he it was wildly funny. He decided to put smells on the blockchain because, you know, then those smells last forever. It's a whole long thing. Let's not get into that, but I found it amusing.
I'm bullish.
It's not as bad as the girlfriend on the NEM blockchain, so you know.
Yeah. Well, we're doing a pre-sale. If anyone wants to get in, huge discounts. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's not a real thing, guys, just in case anyone's wondering. So let's move on, because we've got a lot of stuff to cover. So let's talk a little bit about BIS. Now, recently I posted a Twitter article, a Twitter comment asking people what they thought of a recent report put out by BIS, which is the Bank of International Settlements. Now, they're talking about how Bitcoin is basically unsustainable because of proof of work. Basically, once you get to a point where there are no more rewards, like mining rewards, and it just comes from transaction fees, then they ran numbers, and from their perspective, they didn't see this as something that would be able to secure a network. I'm really interested in your perspective on this. What do you guys, I mean, the overwhelming response that I got on Twitter was, these guys are not pro-crypto. These are not pro-Bitcoin people. Obviously, they're going to be saying this. Like, it was no surprise to anyone that this report came out. There were some interesting things in the article, but I would love to get your perspective.
Yeah, I read it a couple times. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. There was obviously the person who did it. It was not just like a sham piece. They had done a lot of research and knew their stuff, but it was obviously because, you know, the BIS is basically the central bank for central banks, and they do a bunch of different stuff. It's kind of changed throughout the years on exactly what they do, but so basically they're saying that proof of work is too expensive, and once the block reward disappears, transaction fees aren't going to be enough to pay to keep the amount of network security required to, you know, keep it secure. And they also talked about, you know, second layer. They recognize it, going, well, second layer is a solution, but they criticize it because, well, second layers can become more centralized, which it's not technically incorrect, but their proof of that was like, well, if you look at Lightning Network right now, like the vast majority of Bitcoin is held by like a couple wallets, which makes sense because it's a kind of a glorified beta test right now for the most part. I mean, nobody's really trusting this for any kind of consumer level stuff right now.
It's very low amounts of transactions.
So to kind of take that, I mean, it's the take, you know, something that's in its alpha beta test, and to go like, well, look, it's centralized, so obviously it's going to become too centralized in the future. it was a little bit of an unfair criticism. And then, of course, they go into like, oh, you know, what? Okay, then proof work's bad. What do we replace it with? And they go into, well, we're going to need something that's better and that you can coordinate socially, and you need institutionalization, which basically means like, you know, trust us. And then they mentioned a bunch of proof of stake ideas, or Cardano and Ethereum. And it was interesting. I mean, they did bring up a good point. It's not that block rewards disappearing isn't something we shouldn't, you know, be talking about now, but it's not anything that's going to happen anytime soon. We've got a long time, longer than
like
any of us.
100 years to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So unless CRISPR really ups its game, none of us are going to probably be around.
Oh God, I hope CRISPR ups its game.
I know.
My fingers are crossed.
I would love to see the end of the block rewards. So
that would be awesome. No, it's interesting. Like the article, I thought was it brought up some interesting points. When everyone just dismissed it out of hand, I was like, well, hang on, there are some interesting points there. What I didn't like about the article, like, I mean, when I read it, I'm like, well, there are obvious solutions to that. Plus, it's 100 years in the future. That was my issue with it.
It's 20 years in the future for Bitcoin.
20 years in the.
We'll all be around for it, God willing.
Yeah.
Is that? Whoa, wait.
Yes, it's 100 years in the future for some of the newer cryptos, like Smart Cash, for example, pushed it out into the 2100 years. But for Bitcoin, it's 2040. So it's not a bad concern. It's just, you know, basically it takes a lot of assumptions to try to figure out exactly what the fiat dollar value in transactions that will be being transmitted over the network to justify the fees.
Wait, so I'm confused. So, but it's 2140, October 8th is when the last Bitcoin would have been mined in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was pretty sure it was 2140 as well.
Why am I remembering?
Yeah,
wow, I've been seriously thinking the wrong thing. What is 2040 in reference to Bitcoin?
I don't know.
Wow, I feel like an idiot now.
Listen, I was waiting for a time on my show when you would say something incorrect or outlandish. So there we go. We finally got there, Zaphoid. So yeah, 2140 that happens.
I thought that they did bring up a good point though in there.
Okay.
Was that they did recognize that the concept of money being you know, a kind of a social construct. It's not just, you know, pure tech, right? So, you know, because that is something that's very important, that money, you know, is in essence just basically an agreement between, you know, two or more people, is all you really need it to be. So, but no matter how good it is, if it's the most perfect money technically and fundamentally, if you can't get people to agree that it's good money, then it's never, ever going to be money. So for it to be, whether you want to consider cash or store of value, depending on what timeline you're talking about, you have to have confidence and agreement between people. And so it kind of recognizes that money is in essence a battle of, you know, hearts and minds, not necessarily whose math is better, but who has good fundamentals plus can also convince the populace as well, which you can also make a good argument that fundamentals in itself will convince the populace over time because it's a superior form of money.
Yeah. So, so Matt says that you're probably thinking of the singularity, which happens apparently in 2040. If the singularity actually happens in 2040, I'm going to be so happy. Like, I'm going to have the biggest singularity party. You'll all be there because we'll all be one by that stage. So it's going to be awesome.
You're going to be like up on the roof, like Independence Day with the sign?
That's exactly what I'm going to be doing. Like, take me!
And then we'll all explode. So what I was thinking of is that 99.8% of all Bitcoins will be mined by 2040.
Right. So it, again,
there'll only be 100.
Off. Yeah. It does, like, in effect, it really is kind of like not many Bitcoins are being released by that stage. So we do get to see many years in advance as each halvening happens. We get to see the effects of this start to play out. Obviously, there's a big difference between there being no rewards and there being like a small amount of rewards. But I do think we do get a taste of what is going to happen by seeing what happens each time.
Yeah, it will be very interesting. I was reading about this the other day, and I can't remember exactly when this happens because, you know, right now the inflation, really the emission rate of gold is between 2 and 4% every year on average. You know, we're finding the easier reserves of gold, and we are increasing our ability to find more gold. So it's actually stayed pretty stable at that rate for quite a while. And it's not going to be too much longer before Bitcoin actually falls below the gold inflation rate.
Interesting.
So that'll have some interesting economic effects too, and we'll have to see what happens there.
Well, then when asteroid mining happens,
yeah, I mean,
and
that
now the
breaks
inflation schedule is
everything.
going to be like, yeah.
That's why Consensus bought the asteroid mining company, so they could be speeding that up and make crypto more the better stable money than gold, right?
What's Peter Schiff going to do then, huh? So it's an interesting article, and yeah, as we said, like I mean, so what do you guys think? Like I've talked about on my show last week, I talked about proof of stake versus proof of work. Kieran, who comes on the show a bunch, basically says that he doesn't believe that proof of stake is as secure yet. That we're not there yet, but it definitely has potential. So I am excited to see what happens there. Last week on the show we talked about energy and how much energy is used in Bitcoin mining, and the articles that are thrown out about that, which we kind of came to the conclusion was just like a big red herring, that people are saying, hey, look at this thing. Like, no one brings up the energy consumption that the traditional financial sector uses. No one brings up the energy consumption that so many different industries use, and yet they use it as this way to try and derail Bitcoin, which I think is an improvement and more efficient than all of those systems. So, I mean, despite all that, I am still excited about different things like proof of stake, different hybrid systems. So what are your thoughts on those things? Like, should we just still be sticking with proof of work? Are these other systems interesting to you guys?
Proof of work has been proven at this point with Bitcoin and is pretty effective. I agree with you completely, and with Lesho, that the energy consumption, that is a red herring. It's, not all kilowatts are created equal, and comparing it to the traditional financial sector, there is no comparison, particularly as you add up all the employees and the labor hours, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's not something that, it's not a valid complaint at this point in time.
Even just like the storage trucks used to maneuver and take things, even like people's cars to take them to a physical location to get things physically out of a bank. Like, all of that is made obsolete when you have these electronic storage systems. So, I mean, yeah, I completely am on the same page there.
Proof of stake is very interesting to me. There was a recent article this last week about some issues with double staking and proof of stake 3, which could affect a lot of the coins out there. And I don't think it's quite as proven yet. And there are lots of possible weaknesses with it. Not to mention, everybody complains about coins having too few wallets holding too many of the coins. And in proof of work, that doesn't give you nearly as much power for the network as that would in proof of stake. So I don't think proof of work will go away, but I am interested in where proof of stake will go.
Yeah.
I'm on the same page. I won't go into like my whole background and metamorphosis on the subject as well, but I'm not as bullish on the multitude of projects that I was, and I've come to really appreciate proof of work, right? So, and what it offers compared to a lot of the experiments. But I do like experimentation, and I'm not someone that is going to throw shade at projects that are trying new consensus mechanisms and algorithms and all this stuff, because I think all of it, in the end, if it works and it's good, it can always be incorporated into Bitcoin. And even if it doesn't, it offers different ways for people to experiment how to run different forms of money or communities or depending on what the project is. And yeah, proof of work is not going anywhere. It's proven. And just like Chris said, it's been proven. And we've got 10 years now of proof that of basically the greatest bug bounty of all time. And so far, Bitcoin has stood the test. And proof of stake is interesting, but I do agree that is an issue of where you can talk about where the larger amount of wealth gives you adverse amount of influence on a network, versus where that's not necessarily the case with a proof of network.
Yeah, no, I'm loving all the experimentation going on in the space. I love seeing like even the things that don't work out, like all the things we learn, it just makes the existing system so much more robust. And it's just fantastic to see. The one thing that I do worry about, and maybe this links back to what we were saying about Venezuela and suddenly America just deciding, we recognize this new president over there. This idea that we always consider crypto to be safe because we have different competing countries. And so there's always places for people to go. You know, they're competing powers at the moment. Russia is not the same as America, is not the same as China. Like they are all very much in competition with each other. But wondering like if there will come a day when we could see potential consolidation of all of that. Some potential. I mean, you see the World Bank has always trying to get more and more power. You just see America expand its influence as well. Although I think that they're actually on a downhill slope at the moment. We'll see what happens in the next 10 years. But if that ever happens, I mean, that would be a sad state of affairs if we ended up having a consolidation of power in some respect and lost this ability to experiment and go to new jurisdictions if we, to vote with our feet, so to say.
Right now, the financial infrastructure worldwide, we have competing currencies right now in the fiat currency realm. It's just, they're also tied with the fact that they are tied to countries, and it is difficult for people to freely choose between one another. If I wanted to use the Canadian dollar right now, it'd be a lot harder for me to do that without changing the whole rest of my life.
Right.
And with cryptocurrency, we have the ability to choose between a whole bunch of different cryptos and use them all at the same time, one at the same time, whatever. And we're finally seeing the ability to have a free market in currency without the need to physically relocate yourself to a different jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And I love the experimentation that will bring.
Yeah. So we actually got another live, sorry, it's just not loading, power chat through about Venezuela. Let me just pull that up. So Anonymous sent some smart cash and said, the situation in Venezuela is very concerning. Hopefully the new president can help make the great country, help bring that great country to its former glory. By the way, Zaphoid, congrats on launching Smart Shift. It's pretty awesome. What's Smart Shift? And this wasn't a planned plug. Like at some point, I will ask you. Like I have no idea what Smart Shift is. Go for it.
It's a new integration in our web wallet to allow easy conversion in wallet between other currencies and Smart Cash. So make it easier for people to onboard without having to deal with exchanges, because exchanges are our favorite thing ever this last month.
Yeah, right. That sounds interesting. All right, well, maybe we'll do like a little demo later or something. Look into that.
Easy enough to do.
Let's move on. Last week, we talked about Wyoming. We talked about the bills that they're introducing at the moment. The bill aiming to define virtual currencies as money. But let's go a bit deeper into that because there have been some new developments there. Dustin, do you want to take over on this one?
Yeah, sure. So for the folks that haven't been following this specifically, though, Wyoming basically in 2018 they did a bunch of different stuff. Like they did a bill for exempting crypto from the Money Transmitter Act, which is really important in a state, because if you're considered a money transmitter, there's a heap of regulations and costs. That's why Coinbase basically wasn't operating in Wyoming up until that point. They exempted utility tokens from being considered securities with either some, and then they exempted crypto from being taxed as property, as well as a few other things. And just this last week, they allowed the banks to be able to create what they call special purpose depository banks. Oops, can you guys still see me?
Yeah, can see you.
I don't know what just happened with my computer, but it just went haywire.
Oh, no.
You're still there.
Oh no, he froze.
As soon as I said that, he went away.
Yeah, you jinxed it. Thanks so much, Zaphoid. God damn it. So hopefully he logs out and comes back in. But have you been following what's been going on in Wyoming? Because it is pretty exciting there. We talked a little bit about it last week, but you weren't on the show last week, were you?
Correct. I was not. That was even later than this.
Yeah, it was even later because I have my crazy time schedule here. It's been delightful, can I just say? But let's keep talking about what's going on in Wyoming. So the bill proposes the proposed bill. It authorizes banks to provide custodial services for digital assets consistent with this section upon providing 60 days written notice to the commissioner. I mean, it seems like there's so much awesome stuff going on in Wyoming that really foster a great environment for crypto. And I've chatted to Caitlin Long before about what she's doing. Like, she's really been spearheading all of this, and I'll be seeing her again next week. So I'll probably chat to her again and update everyone, like, because she's right at the forefront. She knows in depth what's going on. So I'm going to do a live stream with her, hopefully, and let everyone know what's going on. All right, Dustin just left. He was so excited about what's going on in Wyoming. He's just like, God, contain it, must leave, or something like that, or his computer messed up. But
it happens. It
happens. So do you want to like, have you been following this? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, a little bit. At least one of the bills, the SF0125, there were a couple interesting points in it. I thought basically they're requiring that the banks don't permit rehypothecation of digital assets. That essentially means that the digital assets you deposit have to be kept segregated from digital assets that other people deposit. So there's no pooling of everybody's assets together. This makes sure you can keep track of what you have there. I personally like this. I think it's a good thing. I'm sure other people can explain rehypothecation far better than I can. The actual text says a bank shall not authorize or permit rehypothecation of digital assets under this section. The bank shall not engage in any activity or use or materially affect a digital asset except based on customers' instructions. So it's legally requiring that the banks just hold your money or do exactly what you say with your crypto, which, you know, I would want banks to voluntarily offer to do that rather than come down from on high. But at the same time, it protects customers from having their money played with like we're used to in the traditional markets.
Right.
Of course, the other side of that is this bill explicitly states that the bank is not held liable for losses under this subsection.
Interesting.
Except for liability.
Okay. But wait, they're not held liable except for liability? What does that
They're not held liable except for liability consistent with fiduciary and trust powers. So basically, if they're negligent, sure, they can be held liable. If they're negligent and lose things, somebody comes in. But anything else, they're not held liable for it. So it gives them some protection, which with the way crypto goes up and down now, and you know, there could be, you know, hacks of smart contracts that affect your tokens and whatnot, the bank is not liable if that happens, which I can understand why they would insist that end up in the bill. Yeah. And then there were a couple other things. I don't consider it like the perfect bill to end all crypto bills, but it feels like a pretty good step in the right direction.
Yeah. Do you want to keep going, Dustin, and you can finish off there? Oh, his camera, and there we go.
Sorry. Do you got me now?
We've been trash talking the whole time you were away.
I deserve it, you know. All of a sudden, just dropped me off and then restarted the whole computer. So I don't. Were you guys continuing about the banks, or where were we at?
You're
or do you just want me to pick up where I left off?
I'm going to turn off your camera just so that your audio is playing, just so we can hear you a bit better, I think. All right, go ahead.
Okay, alriady. So I was talking about so just last week they introduced are going to now be allowed to do purpose depository banks, and basically allows for custodial solutions for this space. And that's a big issue for, I guess you'd call it, for the international or institutional investors, is that you know, anybody that's like Edward Jones, anybody that's an investment advisor, does account management, they have to have a custodian, so they can't do it themselves. So it's not like they can just have a Bitcoin wallet for their investors. So these banks being allowed to be meet the SEC definition of being a qualified custodian is a really cool thing. There's nobody else that's doing it. It's a really good clarity in the legal language, which is kind of, is a big win, I think, for the space. The only downside is, I guess, a good thing is it requires 100% deposits. There's no fractional reserve on it, but the side is there's no FDIC protection on that, so it'll just be up to the firms on what they're going to be covering as far as for their investors. But
so that's
currently it's just been hedge funds
that you mentioned, Zafoid, as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the section I mentioned there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so far it's just been either if you want to do it yourself, which a lot of people just aren't in that place or don't want to deal with it, because if it's not a point and click on Chuck Schwab, it's not anything people want to deal with, segment of the West. So anybody that has been doing it institutionally has only been people have access to hedge funds, which the average person doesn't, at least in the U.S. Kind of depends on the fund, but usually you have to have $1 million in liquid assets to be able to kind of invest in these sorts of things. So I think it's a really, really neat thing that they're doing. And now they just introduced it hasn't passed yet. Like all the crypto stuff so far.
That's like the most important word there. They also introduced it hasn't yet. You're cutting out a little bit, so just say that sentence again.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that?
I was saying they a bill that will recognize Bitcoin as money within the state of Wyoming, and it seems like everything that they have been putting through there's a lot of good. By Caitlin Long. I've interviewed her in the past. She's a great asset to this. To this. I don't. Was there? Have you guys?
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit there. So I'll
let you guys take over. Sorry, I'll figure it out.
No, you're fine. It happens to the best of us. It happens to me all the time. And I'm so delighted that it's not me this time. So there you go. But let's move on. We've got heaps of stuff to cover and running out of time here. CBOE withdraws the ban Bitcoin ETF. There's, they're citing government shutdown, all of these things. So what do we think about this? I mean, we talk a lot about ETFs on the show and about how we don't care that much. So you got to wonder why we talk a lot about them. But it is interesting. Sorry, Zapoid, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just have kind of two sides to this. One, I'm pretty sure that everybody who was going to be freaked out by ETF delays has already been freaked out and gone away. The last several delays had zero effect. I don't really see that this had much effect at all in the markets. I think it's going to be like, hey, who's surprised? Fool me once, shame on you. You can't fool me again. Something like that, right? But the other aspect, I did find an article this week citing a study that 58% of U.S. investors would prefer to invest in Bitcoin via an ETF.
Interesting. So 58% is a huge number.
Yeah, and I don't know how reliable, surveys are surveys, take all of them with massive piles of salt. But that says something, exactly what we were just talking about, where a lot of people don't want to handle holding crypto themselves. They want custodial solutions. This is the same kind of thing. Is abstraction layers over crypto are very important to get mass adoption.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a more comfortable tool for a lot of people who are used to dealing with those kind of traditional financial instruments. And especially like getting into crypto exchanges, like it's amazing how much information is out there, but how hard it is for people to find it, because there's so much noise, especially in the crypto space, especially after ICO year. Take a moment to remember ICO year, where just like, there's so much shitty stuff happening there. And the most exciting projects that people are like, oh my God, this is going to be great. We're clearly like the scammiest. It's like, don't go near that, guys. So, I mean, it's very clear we need a lot more education in this space, and maybe ETFs are a good way. maybe ETFs are a good way just to get people's feet wet so that they can, understand this. But then you have a different opinion. So I interviewed Tyrone Ross, he works for, I can't remember the name of the financial institution, but he's a Wall Street guy who spoke at Consensus this year. And I interviewed him because he had a very unconventional perspective from Bitcoin. And he said, listen, everyone's getting excited about ETFs. Wall Street is over the moon about ETFs. And he refuses to introduce his clients to them. Like if they come around, if ETFs get approved, he says, I'm not going to let any of my clients invest in an ETF. And I said, like, why? He said, because Bitcoin wasn't designed for that. It was designed to be peer-to-peer. It doesn't need an intermediary. It doesn't need this extra layer that just complicates things just to, keep putting money in the pockets of the people whose entire livelihood depends on things being complicated and hard to understand in finance. So he said the best thing he could be doing for his clients is educating them about Bitcoin. Like rather than saying, well, here's this comfort zone, I'll lead you to this superfluous, unnecessary thing. Instead, he's saying, I'm going to use that time and redirect it to education, show you how to use an exchange, show you how to use a wallet, and give you the actual assets. And that's really what his company does. I think that's great.
I'm of two minds about that. I'm torn internally because on the one hand, I mean, I'm with Smart Cash. I am all about peer-to-peer money. I'm all about crypto being used as currency. The thing I always say is we're trying to put the currency back in cryptocurrency. I am all for that 100%. At the same time, if my mom wants to get in cryptocurrency, I would have a much easier time telling her to go to TD Ameritrade and buy an ETF and hold on to it that way and not get left behind at least a little bit, because there are so many points of failure that she could run into when trying to buy any crypto, even Bitcoin, but especially any of the altcoins, that I would feel much safer if somebody professional was handling the custodian for her. I really would. And I don't think that all the people alive now who probably will never gain the technical competence to reliably hold their own cryptocurrency should just be left behind and left out of this revolution.
I agree with that, but I think his point as well was that it's much better to even put your money in something that takes custody of your Bitcoin rather than use an ETF. Like he said, there are kind of degrees and levels of evil. He didn't say that. I've added in that word. But degrees of separation from your Bitcoin, I guess you can look at it. And he says, listen, I won't go near the ETF, but I will teach you how to use exchanges. Even if you don't want to be your own security, that's fine. And I agree with you, Sappho. There are some people that would be much better off not trusting themselves because they're going to lose. Like the number of people who have to refresh their password every single time they sign into their Facebook account, they should not be anywhere near Bitcoin. Really, the number of people that I've walked through and given more education to how to work your Facebook or whatever media site, they still can't get it. So yeah, maybe there are better solutions for them. Yeah. But it's an interesting thing.
and some of these ETFs are physically backed. So
yeah. Still, it's
the Van Eck was. The Van Eck was going to be physically backed. And I was actually kind of hopeful that this was actually the one that was going to do it because, they are a longtime player. They've also been pretty innovative. They were the first one to do they were the first one to do fixed income funds, a mutual fund they called it emerging marketplace, but it was, Asia as we, call it now. And so they did a lot of really cool stuff. And I was hoping that this was going to be the one, but it seems like they pulled it of the shutdown. So
it'll come back.
And it seemed like they pulled
this one will come back.
Yeah.
No, it's
because it seemed like
sorry, go ahead.
What's going to happen was the SEC is just going to because they had a deadline and they weren't going to let it go through in a technicality. So that's why the reason given was that they pulled it so that it wouldn't be rubber stamp denied, I guess.
Right. I see. It's the term physically backed ETF is something like Bitcoin ETF is something that I get confused by because isn't that like just Bitcoin? Like what is this extra layer that you're putting on? Like it just seems so unnecessary to me. Like it seems like it's something that electronically tracks the movement of something that is already electronically moving. It's not like you need gold bars in some storage unit that you can't have access to, so you just have a digital representation of that and it makes it easier for everyone. This is literally just another digital moving thing, and then you're saying, oh, attach this other digital moving thing to it. That we're going to have like ETFs soon. Like, I mean, is that kind of what a index? Like, I mean, I don't know. It seems kind of crazy.
That is exactly what it is. It's an abstraction
it does
layer. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. It's an abstraction layer over Bitcoin to shove it into the traditional market space that people understand and know how to deal with.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what it is. And for
let's
the majority of
like the ETF, well, I just want to be honest about, like, when we say that people understand it, what we really mean by that is financial institutions understand it. Because you ask the average person what an ETF is, they have no idea. That doesn't make them more comfortable. But what does make them more comfortable is saying, hey, stockbroker, deal with this thing for me. And the stockbroker is going to say, oh, well, I can make more money if I add another layer on top of that is more obfuscation of this asset. It makes it more complicated. Then I can provide more services and all of this. Like, it does just seem like it's this obfuscation layer that that benefits people in traditional finance. And the average person, as I said, then they're probably not going to feel more comfortable with an ETF. They'll probably feel just as comfortable with actual Bitcoin because they're not very comfortable with either of them, right? So maybe if
I think they'd be more.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that they'd be more comfortable with it just because it's a security. It's that fuzzy little blanket that you like, that you're comfortable with, and I think it's a good thing because then it's I don't know, maybe the volatility of Bitcoin may not be the best lesson for them, but they'll be able to go, okay, so I own this Bitcoin ETF just like they would like a gold ETF, and so they become more, I guess, just with the name, even if it's not true, right? But I own Bitcoin, in my portfolio now, and even though it's not technically true, it's just held in probably one big or hopefully multiple wallets for the institution, verified with as well, because the is the ultimate audit tool. But it's an unnecessary layer. But it if it helps give the slight the Jews, I guess, I think the baby boomer generation is probably one that's going to adopt it. Maybe Gen Xers a little bit more about it and make them more comfortable with it. I say it's a good thing, but at least if there's more Bitcoin being traded, moved around, a liquidity market will help eventually flatten out some of the volatility. Knock on wood, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I like to hate on these things because I think they're dumb, but I definitely see how it could help a lot of people get into this.
You've heard me talking about my feelings about ETFs for months now, and it's not exactly secret, but at the same time, I mean, honestly, a Bitcoin ETF is better than a gold ETF because a gold ETF is impossible to audit their vault. You have to trust somebody else. With a Bitcoin ETF, if they share their addresses, you could confirm that they have the Bitcoin. So it is. There are benefits to it for the average person. Again, if I can tell my mom to go to her TD Ameritrade account and buy some Bitcoin that way, okay, if it was my mom, I would set her up with a ledger or something. But in general terms, it will bring more people into the space, with a big caveat that it really has to be a physically backed ETF. It can't be one of these cash backed ETFs, because that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
What'll be interesting as well is because then you can actually hold it within, at least in America, with the Roth IRA, right? Because then it's tax deferred, or I should say it's not tax deferred. You pay taxes on it already on the money you've already put into it.
Yeah, right now you have to go through like a self-directed IRA to do that.
In there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have some people who will help you run your self-directed IRA if you want to invest it in crypto, and that's what I'm doing for some of mine because it's you don't pay taxes. Yeah.
Nice, interesting. All right, well, we've almost run out of time, so we've got a few more articles. I'm just going to breeze through them. So what always happens, there's way too much stuff to cover in the news, and I don't want to make it like a 4-hour episode. Or maybe I do, but it's very late where you guys are. So let's just cover some interesting things that have cropped up this last week. So some new ransomware strain is locking up Bitcoin mining rigs in China. The ransomware basically threatens to overheat and destroy the rig if victims don't infect other devices or pay a 10 Bitcoin ransom. So it's like this really interesting, vicious new ploy that's like, hey, let us spread this disease or pay us a bunch of money. Like, what are you going to do there? It'd be like, oh, okay, I'll infect some more. Like, it's just kind of this awful situation.
It sounds like the worst chain letter ever.
Yeah, I know.
But seriously, yeah, this sucks. But also this was more or less inevitable. Something like this that would come up. I mean, they're just taking a lesson from what the U.S. and Israel tried to do to Iran with Stuxnet. So, it's the same thing. And if it was now, it wouldn't be too long before something like this happened. And inevitably, if the governments ever did want to attack Bitcoin or other cryptos, this would be a method that they would try to do it with.
Yeah. Let's move on quickly. We've got investors at Davos separate Bitcoin and blockchain and claim that BTC will go to zero. So again, this age-old debate, like, well, I really like blockchain, but I don't know about Bitcoin. It's like, do you really know anything? So it seems that Davos, like last year, I know that my friend Matt, he had a crypto thing going on there, and it seemed really interesting. Like, it seemed very exciting, but it seems like now, perhaps after a year of giant bear market, who would have thunk that in Davos, the year after the giant bear market, it's less excited about Bitcoin than the year after the giant bull run. But that seems to be what's going on there. Have you guys been following what's been going on in Davos?
It's not surprising that the traditional financial people don't understand or appreciate cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. One of my favorite quotes was from Jeff Shoemaker, who is the founder of BCG Digital Ventures. He said, I believe it'll go to zero. I think it's a great technology, but I don't believe it's a currency. It's not based on anything.
These people, like, oh my God, it's just a broken record of complete economically illiterate thought. It drives me crazy. Like, I will have a debate just on that. Like, where does the value, or maybe just a live stream, where does the value in Bitcoin come from? Because this idea that somehow there's like this external value that exists outside of our own subjective viewpoints is kind of crazy. Like, currency is valuable because we find it valuable, right? And this idea that there's something like, oh, well, it's valuable because gold we use for tooth fillings. That's not why gold's valuable, guys. You don't have people exchanging all this gold because they're like, well, because one day it could be used for a tooth filling. Like, that's not how it works. So it's just like, it drives me crazy. And the fact that they're on this prominent stage in Davos spouting this nonsense, I think that we need some real education happening there.
It's okay. They were buying their $40 hot dogs there, though, so it's all good.
Yeah.
It's well, I'm sorry. It's interesting because I mean that's the way that they've been able. The blockchain, not Bitcoin, has been the way that they write all this for the last few years, while also simultaneously saying Bitcoin's going to die. Yeah, we can't deny that there is a little bit of coolness to it, and it'd be maybe find a way going. Example, maybe we could create some sort of coin that dentists could use, but or yes, they're my favorite of them. And so it's not surprising that people have an inherent interest in the traditional financial system keeping going as the way it does, because it makes sense. It's what gives them an advantage over people who are not that same level of control. So of course that you are going to be more for whatever gives you an advantage. It's pretty common business practice. But I can't remember. Wasn't there somebody was putting a book together of all the claims of Bitcoin being dead? And,
oh yeah, well there's
I didn't know if some
page that
Bitcoin obituary.
Yeah,
if you bought $10 at every point, at every time somebody in the mass media said Bitcoin was dead, you'd have millions and millions and millions of dollars, something like that. It was hilarious. But but yeah, go to 99bitcoins.com. They have an obituary chart there.
Yeah. So let's keep going. And Dustin, just so you know, you are still breaking up a little. I'm not sure if when your computer restarted, it like automatically booted some other program that's using your internet, but I don't know. It was working better before, just so that you know. But I've only got a few more articles just to quickly breeze through. Let's pull this up. Mastercard is fined $650 million by the EU for artificially raising costs of card payments. I was having a little bit of a gripe about this before we started. For artificially raising costs of card pay. What is artificially raise? I mean, what does that even mean? Like Mastercard is a private company that sets their fees, right? But this is artificial if they decide to set it somewhere where the customers don't like it. But there was something more going on there. It's like an antitrust issue, apparently, which I hate anyway. But Zafo, do you want to walk us through a bit of background on this?
Basically, the European Union fined them the $570 million because Mastercard rules were restricting competition between different banks across the borders of the EU. So basically the EU said, no, you can't use these lines, imaginary lines on the map to base your rules on. You have to use our imaginary lines on the map to base your rules on, and please give us $570 million. So it's one cartel that's bigger than another cartel bossing the little cartel around. That's really all it is in this point. But at the same time, it does talk about how much money is involved in this traditional banking sector and how much overhead they're adding to our everyday financial transactions that does not need to be there.
Right.
Tying this back to talking about the earlier inefficiencies of the proof of work mechanism, this is incredibly inefficient, and it's just lining their pockets.
Yeah, it's not just inefficient. It is basically government-enforced cartels that are running the show because the barriers to entry for competitors to come in are so goddamn high. And so it really is this terribly unfair system where we don't get choice as a consumer. We are left with whatever the government decides to support. So thank you, government. And then for them turning around and saying, oh, but we're protecting you and we're keeping an eye on them with antitrust laws, making sure that they don't get too big. It's like, guys, you created them. You like entrenched their long-standing, like their impermeable foundation. Like you've built all of that around them. You built this moat and this castle around them so no one could get there. And now you're pretending that you're protecting us from this thing. Like you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. Let's keep going because again we're out of time, but I just want to really run through. So a thing I forgot to mention with Maduro when we're talking about Venezuela. So he was recently denied a bid to pull $1.2 billion in gold from the Bank of England. So now is this money that was Venezuela's money or like that was being hosted, like held? Did the Bank of England just have custody of it and that was theirs, but now they're being denied it? Like what's happening there?
Yeah, basically central banks, the Fed, the EU central bank, whatever, they move gold around between themselves a lot. So they don't hold all their gold in one place, I assume, to protect themselves from something. I don't know. And so this is just interesting timing with Venezuela, and they're trying to get their gold back, undoubtedly to pay off some international debts. But also it really ties into the whole crypto scheme of, not your keys, not your crypto.
Right.
If you're not actually holding your gold, it's not yours. And that actually has been a long canard in the gold bug communities too, where if you're not holding on to your own gold, it really isn't your gold. And this is a reminder of that, but also just, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. I believe in the past, Germany took like well over 5 or 6 years to get their gold out of our Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And everybody's
America's
actually
like, nope, not giving you gold, Germany.
Yeah. And everybody's actually wondering, like, do they actually have the gold? Has this gold all been fractionally reserved, loaned out? What exactly is going on here? So, and this does tie into a lot of people who still think that these fiat currencies are backed by gold. They're not backed by gold. We all know they're not backed by gold. Nobody real actually says they're backed by gold, but people still think it if you go onto the street and ask them. And this is tied into somewhat exposing that myth of your bank, your central bank doesn't even have all the gold it says it does, much less all the gold actually back the currency that it is given out and produced.
Yeah, it's like this weird system where everyone's loaning to everyone else, and then so like you know like, and then we've got all this fractional reserve stuff going on. America is saying, oh, Germany, you can't get your gold back, and is that because they're using it to leverage their own debt as well? Meanwhile, like it's just there's so many things going on there, but you also got to wonder, like, why is Venezuela in dire straits when it has all of these reserves sitting there? Why were they hyperinflating their currency away when they actually had this wealth? They have oil. They have to have made such bad decisions to get to the state where they are, when they have all this oil reserves, they have all this gold, which now apparently they can't get because no one trusts them. Like, if they are so much in debt, why did it take this long to be spending their money? Like, I don't know. It seems like it's the child who's borrowing money from their parents and just putting it straight into their bank account, and they're getting their own reserves. They've got that, but they're not spending their money. They just keep borrowing from their parents. So the parents trying to cut them off, right? And it's like, why were you borrowing money from someone when you have your own money? Why get into debt in a situation like that? It just seems crazy.
There's a lot of reasons. Quite often you can make more lending out the money you have and borrowing money from somebody else versus just spending what you have.
Right.
Even though there's risk on both ends of that. But also, as for, amounts of debt, at no point did Venezuela, I'm pretty sure the U.S. has a higher debt to GDP ratio than Venezuela. The U.S. and Japan is almost certainly worse. And it's not just a matter of how much debt they have. It's a matter of that they're completely inefficient at doing anything because they've socialized all their industries. You can't socialize your oil industry and expect to compete with non-socialized oil industries. Yeah. This is, they seized their oil wells from private industries, and they're out of money because they couldn't keep it running. It's not like anybody took it from them. It's that they can't manage it because you can't do that in a socialized system. That is one of the huge failures of it. Yeah. And it's human failure. It's not because they don't have the resources.
Yeah. Let's move on again, because there's just one more thing that I want to cover. So talking a little bit about XRP, or Ripple bracket XRP, as apparently it's controversial to say these days, which is interesting. So apparently there's issues about market cap, and they're currently boasting $13 billion market cap. However, there's a data company called Messari that suggests that the cap could be as much as $6 billion lower. Dustin, did you want to talk a little bit more about this one? And hopefully your sound comes through all right, but we'll fill in the words ourselves if we don't hear them. Be inventive, guys.
If I'm coming through, I'm really cracking up. Just let me know, and I don't want to subject the listeners to like bad takeout order audio.
I'd like a French
quality, so
and some Coke.
Yeah, but sorry, which is I've really been kind of a big fan since they started kind of trying to professionalize a lot of the data in the space. They'd reported an issue, or not necessarily an issue, but were trying to come up with a better way to determine true market cap. Basically, because right now the way market cap works, supply times whatever the coin is worth. So with XRP, they're saying the listed supply is 41 billion and 31 cents or whatever. And they are basically saying that about 19.2 billion of that maybe, and I was looking, the quote was illiquid or subject to significant selling restrictions, meaning the individuals who have that XRP, mostly of Ripple, they have that, but they're legally bound not to sell them, which is, this is very common with like startups, the founders, employees, investors who get paid in that stock, and in Ripple's case XRP, to avoid destroying that price by everyone kind of like selling right away. They'll sign agreements to lock it up, and they're not allowed to touch it. They own, and probably in XRP's case, they have the private keys. They're just not allowed to touch it, or maybe they don't even have the full private key. I don't know how exactly those locks work, but we're trying to say that maybe with the, if you take that 19.2 out, that revised like another 3 billion in the true market cap. And it was an interesting thought. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think that there should be maybe it's not really technically, it's not circulating. The supply is not available to the public. To the people who actually own those coins can't sell them, so it's by definition not able to circulate. But what was even more interesting was after the fact, where Ryan Selkis, who founded Messari, making, the XRP army of Twitter was making threats, and they had apparently people had called his house multiple times, said his wife's birthday, and so he put out tweets saying that he was calling the cops so he doesn't get swatted, which is where people fake thing into a house. But by this morning, apparently it was over. So I don't know. It was just kind of one of those crypto dramas. That was a little. The story is true, which I have no reason not to believe it, though it would have been quite terrifying for probably Ryan and his family. But it's just one of those things where the other space kind of meets the actual real meat space.
Yeah, for sure. I do wonder about like that definition of, well, it's not in, it's like it's being locked up, therefore it's not in circulation. I mean, you could say that about so much though. Like, I mean, would you say that something in a long-term deposit is not in circulation if you put it on your bank account? Would you say that anyone holding Bitcoin, if they're not spending it, that's not in circulation? I mean, it seems like it is in circulation. It's been used for a specific purpose of holding, or, like, what does it mean to be in circulation? It seems like it's a strange realm where we're saying one thing, but we're actually referring to what's happening with money, in another way. Like, any thoughts on that?
Well, CoinMarketCap does have their definition of circulating supply. Basically, they consider it their best approximation of the number of coins that are circulating in the market and in the general public's hands. So they would consider, if you put it in long-term storage, it's still circulating because it's your coins, you still control of them, you're the general public. But if an ICO, they didn't issue half their tokens, that's not part of their circulating supply, because
right.
that's
agree
never
with
been
that.
unlocked. So, and that's what they're kind of considering the equivalent of in this Ripple case.
I see.
Where these are coins that cannot either by code or by law.
I see.
Go on.
I was going to say, what about Satoshi's wallets? What would we consider that?
It's a great
question.
What? Satoshi's wallets, which are, again, locked up and you can't access.
Well, that is the thing, is how much of Bitcoin isn't actually circulating because everybody's lost the keys. It's a lot of that can't really be codified and proven by CoinMarketCap. So they're theoretically trying to do the best they can. I don't necessarily agree with how they've done it, and they don't seem to be consistent across all the coins on their list with how they do it. But that is what they say on their side. And in that case, then, these, 6 billion coins or whatever of Ripple, however that works, or however many it is, shouldn't be counted in the CoinMarketCap list the way it is. But he may be wrong. Maybe all these could be moved at any moment. And, and to be completely fair, market cap is a really weird way to judge any particular cryptocurrency, because it really is just something that's taken from the stock market space that is supposed to talk about what the company is worth in stock, and then you compare it to what the company's actual assets are worth, and you can tell how overvalued or undervalued a particular stock is. And that applies to cryptocurrency not at all.
Right.
Sorry, it's a thing I've read too much about recently.
No, it's great. It's like I wish that you were reading about things other than Ripple and stuff. Because it's always like heartbreaking when someone is really well informed, but it's about like a shitty thing. I mean, I think there are some XRP supporters in my chat, so I'm sorry, guys. Just not a big fan, but we'll agree to disagree.
I'll quote Twitter, Ripple to 589 by the end of the year, or that's what they're saying, right?
Listen, I'm not even saying anything about the value. It seems to have been a very smart investment. I think that whenever you have any sort of cronyism, governments, involved with the private sector, you're probably going to have a profitable industry. That's not my point. The point is kind of the underlying philosophy of whether you want to get involved with that. But I'm sure people are making a lot of money, and good for them. And I hope they put that to good use and create more freedom for the world rather than more cronyism. If they are making money from that. But on that note, we have actually run out of time here, and we still had some stuff to cover, but maybe we can say that for next week, or maybe we'll have to start to do like midweek, like quick crypto recap, where we talk really fast or something and just kind of go through midweek stuff, because there's always so much stuff to cover. But I wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone who sent through a power chat: Anonymous, Polly, Lamas B, who became a supporter of mine during the chat. So thank you. I will send you the link to my private Telegram group, and I look forward to seeing you there. But to everyone who's been in the chat, you guys are awesome. I love you all. As I said, it's Australia Day here, so I'm going to go and enjoy the wonderful sunshine that you can probably get a glimpse of here. I hear about ice storms or something going off over your side? That must be bad, guys. I feel for you.
Forecasted wind chill in my area down to about -40 F next week.
Yeah, not like that here. This morning I went to the beach. I did some morning yoga, meditation on the beach. Then I went for a swim. Then I had mimosas with my friends. And then I came and did a live stream in the beautiful warm air. Not to make you all feel bad about where you are, but we've definitely got it good in Australia right now. So I'm sending you all my warmth and love, and I'm bringing as harnessing as much of it as possible, because very soon, as of week after next, I will be back in normal time zone. You will have regular live streams at reasonable hours again. So that's something we can all look forward to, so that Zafoy doesn't have to stay up until 10:30 at night. But Dustin and Chris, I really, really appreciate both of you being here. And Dustin, thank you for coming on for your first show. You guys wanted to check out his podcast. It's really awesome. As I said, he did a great interview about Bitbacker earlier, so I'll post a link to that one and to his channel. And Chris, you also have a podcast slash YouTube channel now, and you're doing lots of great interviews on there as well. What's that one called?
Smart Talk Radio. You can. I try to post everything on Bitbacker when I publish it, so just follow me here and you'll listen to me talk to people.
So we've got Smart Talk Radio, we've got Did You Know Crypto. They're two channels that you guys can check out that are really awesome. But I really appreciate both of you coming on the show. It's been fantastic.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, for having me on, and I will have my audio and video upload issues fixed if this didn't ruin me for coming on again.
You are banished. You are kicked off the island. Go. No, you are always welcome, Dustin. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish that we could have just heard more of your words. So thanks to everyone for watching. If you haven't liked the video, it really, really helps me if you do that. So I would love you to click the like button and the little bell so you get notifications of when I do live streams and awesome things like that. And also, if you haven't subscribed, that's an awesome thing that really helps me as well. So Bitbacker is great. I love you guys who are on Bitbacker, but if you aren't doing that, then yeah, a subscription or a like is just a huge plus for me. So thanks everyone for being here. Go and have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for taking the time out and listening to the crypto news this week. Talk to you guys later.
Sayonara.
Bye.